This is Brad Templeton from Robocars.com, and I'm here to give you a review of some of the stories you may have missed about self-driving cars in the early part of 2022. We're going to talk about Cruise, we're definitely going to talk about Tesla, we'll talk about Waymo, Motional, Wayve, Waabi, and the move towards end-to-end machine learning, Starship delivery robots, China, Dan O'Dowd and the Dawn Project, the Feds and NHTSA, and new details about the Uber crash. First, let's talk about some news about Cruise. Cruise had an accident of sorts, and this got a lot of attention in the headlines. Now, it turns out there's nothing to see here. This was a hit and run by another driver who cut in front of the Cruise from the wrong lane. What was interesting about it was just the questions about what a future, more advanced self-driving car might do to prevent such an accident, even when it's not its fault. You may remember that Waymo did a study about all the fatal crashes in Chandler, Arizona, where they operate. And in the simulator, they tried to have their car play the bad car that was at fault, as well as play the car that was hit. And they found they could prevent all the accidents if they played the bad car. That's not too surprising. But they actually were able to prevent most of the accidents when they were the car that was hit. A really advanced car, in the case of this Cruise mistake, might have been carefully tracking the eyes of the driver next to it at the same time as it was tracking everything else on the road. This is something that robots can do that humans can't: look everywhere at once. Maybe someday cars will get so good that they'll really read the intent of everyone in the road all the time, and they'll be a bit faster at responding to potential mistakes that might cause an accident. Tesla, by the way, has, among other things, dropped the radar in the Model S and Model X cars. They originally dropped the radar from the newer Model 3s and Ys. This was said to be because they had decided that radar was actually holding them back, that it was creating false positives, and that it was thus a negative. The real reason, most of us suspect, is that the chip shortage meant that they couldn't get the radars that they wanted to put in the cars. This seems very clear because autopilot got worse after they pulled the radar, and they wouldn't have done that if they had a choice about it. I think they'd have waited to get their all-vision system up to match the quality of the radar system before pulling it. In fact, many people are reporting greater incidence of what is called phantom braking, which is to say that when you're driving with autopilot or with adaptive cruise control, the car suddenly stops or slows down for, well, no reason at all, at least no reason that you should slow down. Sometimes you can understand it, was a little scared of something, that it wasn't going to hit it. But for whatever reason, we've seen Teslas, I've seen this in my own driving of a Tesla, suddenly slow down. And people online are reporting that they believe this has gotten more frequent after the radar was disappeared. Now, this is actually being investigated by the Federal Safety Agency right now. Another interesting tidbit of Tesla news is that Tesla, well, they didn't announce this, but people have found that if you're ordering a new Tesla and you order the $12,000 additional full self-driving option, you will get your Tesla sooner. Now, this is a little interesting because this $12,000 package, it just recently went up to $12,000, but it's been fairly expensive, doesn't get you very much when you pay it. You get a couple of worthwhile new features in the car. You get automatic parking, parallel parking, and some perpendicular parking. You get what they call Navigate on Autopilot, a very simple lane changing and route following system when you're using autopilot. And a few other minor features, including the Smart Summon, which most people say isn't very smart. It's definitely not worth $12,000. It's really not worth more than a couple of $1,000s. What you're paying for when you give that large chunk of change to Tesla is what they promise they'll give you in the future. They promise that someday you're going to get their full self-driving system once it goes into production. Of course, some people who have paid for this have been invited to participate in what Tesla calls a beta program of that system, but only some of them. You don't get this just by paying the money. Well, should you buy that is a question that people often ask. And my advice has been this way, at least in the past, which was that you don't know when Tesla's going to deliver it. You don't even know if they're going to deliver it. If they do deliver it, it's going to raise the price of Tesla stock a lot. If they fail, Tesla stock may stay the same or go down because of how good a car company it is. But no question, if they actually succeed with this product, it's going to go up a lot. The only reason to buy it now is that you fear that Tesla is going to charge more in the future for it. Well, Tesla has been increasing the price, so there's a reason to suspect they'll charge more in the future, especially once it's working. But nonetheless, the stock will probably go up more. So if you take that $12,000 and you put it into Tesla stock, you're very likely to do better, even at the very inflated price that we currently see for Tesla stock. Now, if they don't deliver it, who knows what's going to happen. But I think you also have to consider that once they release this, they might be the first. I'm not sure they will. But they will definitely at some point, either when they release or later, have competition. And when they have competition, they can't set the price anymore. The price will be set by the competitive market. So you don't necessarily have to believe that the product is going to be as expensive as Tesla wants it to be. It's going to be whatever the market will bear. Now, speaking of charging money, one of the small pieces of news, but with interesting consequences, and I wrote a story about this, you'll find in the description. When I have written stories, you'll find those links in the description. Waymo got permission to charge money for their robotaxi rides in San Francisco. Now, if you didn't know, Waymo has expanded their robotaxi service out of Chandler, Arizona, and into San Francisco. Although not all of it, it's only covering the non-downtown parts of San Francisco and with a limited set of testers. But it is taking rides from the public. It still uses safety drivers, unlike in Chandler, where many of the rides come with nobody in the vehicle. Now, why is it so important to charge? Because nobody's making money on this. All of this is still in the development phase. It's very expensive to produce the cars, maintaining them, developing, managing this. It's all not in production. It's not at scale where you get to actually get the cost down and potentially make money from it. But by being able to charge money for a ride rather than being forced to give them for free, as they have been up to this point in San Francisco, you suddenly can experiment with business models. You can explore the big unanswered question of what it means to run a self-driving robotaxi business. What will people actually pay? Can they pay as much as they pay for Uber? Probably not. After all, they can already get Uber, and it hasn't taken over car ownership or done the things we expect robotaxis to do. But you can try different prices. You can try and make it cheap, maybe as cheap as owning your own car or even cheaper than owning your own car. Or you can put it in the middle, the sort of price you'll charge when there isn't much competition and you want to make a bit more money. You could try subscriptions, where you pay a monthly fee or a monthly fee plus a per ride fee or per mile fee. And of course, they could price it just like Uber and Lyft do today. But what's important is this, that they not just duplicate Uber, because in order to succeed, in order to capture that brass ring, the thing that everybody's investing billions of dollars in order to win, you have to be a car replacement. You have to convince people this service is good enough that I will not bother owning a car, that I don't need to have my own car all the time, that I can get door-to-door service when I want it. They'll have to give me a rental car if I want to drive away from their service area, obviously, and make that really easy and frictionless. Maybe they'll even give me Uber rides when they want to let me go places that they don't go in their service. But one way or another, people have to decide, I don't need to own a car anymore, and I'm going to use this for all my travel. That's the only way that you capture the $5 trillion automobile ground transportation market around the world. That's the big number that's gotten everyone excited and investing all this money in their robo-taxis. Now, to make a car replacement service, you're going to have to give people a short pickup time. They can't wait for 10 minutes when they ask for a ride in order to get it. That's going to be pretty inferior to owning your own car, which is always, of course, right there in your driveway or not too far away from where you are, where you parked it. Of course, you do get that big advantage of not having to find or pay for parking with a robotaxi service. Now, to make a short pickup time, you have to have a real fleet. You've got to have idle vehicles near every customer, vehicles that are sitting empty, ready for someone to take a ride, and you've got to have a certain number of them per square mile. And if you're going to cover as many square miles as San Francisco is, which is 49 square miles, they're not serving all of it, you need to have a fair number of cars out there that are sitting empty. You also have cars that are obviously taking people on their rides. In order to do that, the simplest way to do it without spending the huge amount of money on a giant fleet is to just not have as many customers in the business. After all, Lyft, which is much smaller than Uber, still competes with it on wait time, even though they have fewer cars and they just have fewer customers, so they still have enough idle vehicles for every customer. Now, another company that's entered the robotaxi space in a bigger way is Motional. Maybe you haven't even heard a lot about Motional. It began as Nutonomy, a company which was a joint venture of MIT people and Singapore people, which was then acquired by one of the large tier ones, and now it became a joint venture of Hyundai and Aptiv, the tier one, in order to build self-driving car technology. Its startup originated the same way that Argo and Cruise are, the other two big ventures that are tied closely to car companies. Well, anyway, they're going to offer their own robotaxi service in Las Vegas. It's going to be free, but unfortunately, it's only going to offer a small area around downtown Las Vegas. Now, if you haven't been to Las Vegas, or even if you have been, you may never have been to downtown because most tourists and convention goers only spend time on the Strip, as they call it, where all the big resort hotels are and the convention center are. Downtown is an area that was actually a little bit down earlier on. It was reinvigorated by Zappos and other companies, so it's got stuff going on, but it'll be a new place to try robotaxis. Many people have liked Las Vegas because it has a very large taxi and Uber business. It has a pretty large population, but also a huge population of visitors who want to use these vehicles. Now, earlier on, I told you how Dan Ammann, the CEO of Cruise, had been fired by Mary Barra, the General Motors CEO, because he wanted to take Cruise public, and he wanted to make Cruise focus only on Cruise and not spend a lot of its time offering things to GM to put in their cars that they sell to customers. Cruise also wants the robotaxi business, so much so that they have built the Origin, which is a custom-designed vehicle meant only to be a robotaxi. It has no wheels in it. It's got face-to-face seating. Many people find it very similar to the Zoox vehicle for that purpose, although it isn't fully symmetrical like the Zoox is. However, Cruise has now gotten approval from NHTSA to manufacture their vehicle. If you want to manufacture a vehicle in the United States, it has to get approval and show that it meets various safety standards in order to be manufactured. They have done this, which means they're now thinking they will ramp it up. I actually wonder if they need this approval. Technically, the approval is only for cars that you sell or import, because the federal government has power over those. Cruise does not, as far as I know, intend to sell the Origin. They intend to use it as a taxi service, so you'll only be able to use it by buying their ride service from them. And maybe that means different regulation. I guess that remains to be seen. But anyway, Cruise decided that Kyle Vogt, who was the founder of Cruise, but had let other people be the CEO, he is now going to be the permanent CEO of Cruise. We'll see what he wants to do different from Dan Ammann, the one who was fired. I think he probably believes in a lot of those same visions. Kyle has always also been a big believer in making the robotaxi. Well, originally, actually, he wanted to just build an add-on autopilot-style kit for Audi cars. That's what Cruise did originally, but very soon it shifted into providing the robotaxi service or wanting to make the tools for that. Kyle is no slouch. He, for example, has built things like Twitch, which made him some of his first early money, as well as other services. So he's got experience in running not an automotive company, but in running a company. So they decided, let's let the founder run the company again. I think that's almost always a good idea, as long as the founder is capable of doing something. So we'll see what goes on with Cruise. Next, I'll talk about two companies that have both received investment and attention, who are attempting to do something fairly radical in the design of their self-driving systems. Now, You've seen Waymo, which is trying to build a car with a combination of machine learning and a lot of other algorithmic tricks with all their experience. You've probably seen Tesla talk about how they're more focused on machine learning, but still have a variety of other code in their systems. Their engineering director constantly talks about software 1.0 and software 2.0, which is machine learning based, and his efforts to make them move more and more into software 2.0. These two companies, one of them Wayve and another one called Waabi, started out of people who were on the Uber advanced development project in Toronto, who did not move over to Aurora when it was acquiring the Uber ATG. They both want to build cars that are almost entirely, or in the case of Wayve, entirely based on end-to-end machine learning. Now, what that means is that you have a black box neural network, which is trained with machine learning techniques, and it takes the input from the sensors directly into the neural network, processes it, and outputs the final decisions, i.e., turn left, turn right, stop, go. Nothing in the middle, no attempt to, for example, build a perception system, which tries to identify everything, another planning system, which then decides what you're going to do within it. Well, if you're a neural network fan, that is the approach that you like. People believe that basically the ability of neural networks and machine learning is unbounded, that there's nothing it can't do. It is, of course, an analog to the kind of thinking which they believe is done in natural brains, including human brains. Now, we are not just neural networks, so there's a bit of optimism in that claim, but nonetheless, there have been many examples where people have put problems to neural networks and they've done amazing things that have surprised everyone, winning at Go against human champions, folding proteins. By the way, both of those results and many of the other great results in neural networks you've heard about came from DeepMind, which is a unit of Google. And DeepMind works together with Waymo. So don't think that Waymo are any slouches on neural network technology. They're actually in possession of what everyone believes to be some of the most advanced technology out there. But they don't use a pure neural network approach. I think this bet is a long shot. I think it's very interesting. Waabi's bet in particular is based on building a really good simulator. And that simulator will actually allow the cars to learn in the simulated world through all sorts of circumstances at a vastly cheaper process than sending cars out on the road and driving. You have to learn things that came from the world, but you can do more in a simulator, which is you can deliberately generate problems for a car that will almost never or rarely show up in the real world. You can even use a popular new AI technique, which is adversarial training of neural networks, where you have one system deliberately trying to trick the system you're training, and it tries to come up with problems. It pushes it until it breaks, and then you either decide, well, it doesn't need to handle that problem, or you decide you found somewhere it breaks and you can fix it. So Waabi is going to attempt to build a network that can drive a car using that approach and mostly end-to-end learning. Wayve also wants to do purely end-to-end learning. Next, I have some good news, and of course, I have self-interest here. It's about Starship. Starship is a robotic delivery company that runs on sidewalks with small robots. Starship recently did 2 funding rounds that raised for them a total of $100 million, giving them lots of money to pursue their plan. But on top of that, it announced that it has now completed 3 million commercial deliveries with its fleet of 1,700 robots. Now, they only recently announced just 2.5 million, so they're going gangbusters, and they're reaching levels that are cheaper than a human. So unlike almost everyone else in the self-driving and autonomous robot business, they've actually got commercial operation going on. They have a real business, a production business going on. Everybody else is still very much in pilot projects. So I think that's quite significant. Starship does it because operating on the sidewalks, we have a much simpler problem to deal with. You don't have to worry about, of course, killing what's inside your vehicle. You can't kill a pizza. But you also won't hurt the other people on the road because you're lightweight and you're not going very fast. But you can still carry out delivery. So I was Starship's original advisor on many technology and strategy matters. So I have shares of Starship, and so I want them to do well. And so understand my bias in talking about this. But this has, I believe, been a little bit ignored in the world of autonomous driving, because it's not on the road. It's not the hardest problem, but then it's the problem that's getting solved first and can change how delivery works. They're not the only company, of course. Many other companies are working in delivery robots. One of them, which we'll talk about in two ways, has pulled out of the business. And it's pulled out, in fact, of the self-driving business in the United States, and that's Yandex. Yandex is the leading search engine of Russia, sort of the Google of Russia. Now, at first blush, you may think Yandex has pulled out because all Russian companies are facing problems in dealing in the West under the war going on. But I'm going to be a little more critical of Yandex here, and not because of my biases on Starship, but because if you are the search engine of a country, it's the place that people go for news. And now Yandex has no choice in this matter, but as that place, they have been forced by Russian laws to hide things from the Russian people. They do not show them news saying there is even a war going on in Ukraine. Now, the other agencies, the other news agencies that wanted to be independent, when they faced these laws, they did the very, very courageous step of simply shutting down. They said, we will not lie to our users, and Yandex has decided it won't take that step. And as a result, I'm not shedding too many tears for the fact that they've had to pull their business from the West. And I hope in time this is resolved. I hope in time that Yandex gets the courage to say, no, we will not collaborate in hiding war crimes. That's just over the line, I think, for every company, as expensive as that decision may be. Getting back to Waymo, Waymo actually had an interesting lawsuit recently over the data that they disclosed to the government. Now, there are several rules that require companies operating self-driving vehicles like Waymo to send reports to the government of all sorts of things that happen, about all the interventions that are done by their safety drivers and other software problems that occur. And Waymo was sending a fair bit of data about these to the government, but it said, we don't want the government to reveal anything but the totals, the sort of information that's supposed to be there, that otherwise there are trade secrets in there. So they sued about that, and they won. So a lot of people were surprised by that. They wonder, is Waymo hiding something? I don't know the answer to this, actually. I don't know whether there was anything really crucial in there. Companies just naturally like to keep things close to the vest. At the same time, we in the public want to know what's going on, so it's an interesting little battle going on. I suspect that it wasn't really anything particularly fancy. I actually laud Waymo, where I used to work 10 years ago, for being much more open than most of the other companies. They have published safety details of all their operations in Chandler, details on every potential accident they had, something that I actually think all other companies should be doing, and I wish they were. So nonetheless, we obviously don't get everything that we would want from Waymo. Heading over to China, I want to talk about the expansion there. Now, we don't really see as much about what's going on in China here. And with the borders that are shut down because of the pandemic, Western people are not going to China very much to see this. But the players in China that are doing real robotaxi operation with either no safety driver or very limited safety driving, including Baidu and AutoX and WeRide, have been expanded. AutoX has now expanded their service area around Shenzhen to over 1,000 square kilometers with a no safety driver in a central core area of about 200 of those square kilometers. AutoX has also expanded to having about 1,000 taxis. Baidu expanded from a small region of Beijing to doing much more of Beijing, and also is now in Shenzhen, where AutoX is. Another news story, and this one I did write a story about, and you'll see it in the comments, in the description, was about a complex interplay between Tesla and NHTSA, the Federal Safety Agency, about a version of the Tesla full self-driving prototype, which would do a rolling stop at a four-way stop if it decided that the stop or the intersection was empty. No other cars, no pedestrians in the intersection. In that case, it would, like a lot of humans I know and that you know, do what's sometimes called a California stop, where you slow down to 4 or 5 miles an hour, and then you proceed through the intersection. Now, a lot of people said, yes, this is just crazy. Why would a self-driving car break the law on stop signs like that? That's absolutely nuts. I'm not so sure that's true. Now, first of all, NHTSA is not, you have to understand this, There are many agencies which regulate driving on the roads and cars. NHTSA is the federal agency, and their job is to make sure that cars that are sold in the U.S. are not dangerous. So they put in the rules about airbags, and they put in the rules about crumple zones and how things are designed inside and outside the car. They do not, under any circumstance, however, define the rules of the road. So that's done by the states, by the Department of Motor Vehicles. They lay the rules of the road, like what you must do at a stop sign. And of course, there are the police who enforce the rules of the road. They're the ones who give you a ticket when you were to roll at a stop sign, and they can do that. They don't do it very often, but they do it. Well, so NHTSA's mandate is to make sure that cars are not dangerous. Now, this may surprise a lot of people, but rolling stops are not dangerous, especially at empty intersections. They're obviously not dangerous at a truly empty intersection, but they are not even dangerous at intersections that have other people in them. And in fact, in many other parts in the world, if you go to Europe, you will discover that four-way stops even stop signs are extremely rare there. They prefer to do intersections either with multiple yield signs, which is beyond a rolling stop, or of course their favorite is the roundabout, which you enter at full speed if no one is present. And they have better safety records than there are in the United States, so it's actually hard to argue that rolling stops are dangerous. In fact, of course, no cruise control out there would stop at a stop sign at all. It's the job of the driver working with the cruise control or driver assist system to do the stopping. What Tesla did at worse was put in a system where they would roll through the stop. The driver always had the ability to hit the brake if they wanted to. And Tesla drivers, Tesla FSD drivers, are supposed to and had better be watching their car carefully and hitting the brake when they think it's going to do something that's upset. But this is actually a first, because we have not had cars regulated to say they have to obey the law. We don't make the cruise control in your car force you to obey the speed limit. It's no rule that says you cannot set the cruise control at any speed you want to. Tesla let the human driver, at least the owner of the car, configure the car to say whether it would do these rolling stops or not. You could tell it not to, or the default, admittedly, was that it would. Now, the biggest question about this wasn't about rolling stops being safe, I think. A better point they could have made is, well, look, this Tesla FSD prototype is just so low quality right now that we don't trust it to decide there's no one at the intersection. Because again, I think most people would have to admit, if there's absolutely nobody at the intersection, it's not a safety issue if you roll through it. But NHTSA didn't say that. NHTSA didn't say, Tesla, we want you to pull this out because you're not quite ready to decide there's nobody at the intersection to let the user do this. Now, why am I so interested in cars breaking the law? That's because right now we have a vehicle code that's written for humans. And in fact, we have one that humans break all the time. And in fact, we've almost got a world where if you don't break the vehicle code, you'll become a barrier to traffic. That's certainly true for speed limits in the United States. Now, in France, for example, the speed limit on the autoroute is 130 kilometers an hour, which is almost 80 miles an hour, and most people stay within it. They have set a real speed limit, and most people follow it, and they actually do ticket the ones who go above it. In the United States, we set the limit to be 65 miles an hour. Everybody drives 75 miles an hour. Most of the time, the vast majority of the time, nobody is ticketed for doing that. Every so often, the police can pull you over if they feel like it, which is not a good thing. You don't actually want a system where the police pull you over whether they feel like it. It should be based on a hard and fast rule about whether you broke a good principle. So this NHTSA decision has actually moved us into new territory about how we regulate things. The next story is the arrival of a new software foundation. It's actually, I'm not sure it's a nonprofit, called the Dawn Project, founded by a man named Dan O'Dowd, who is the CEO of Green Hills Software. Green Hills Software is not a software company that's known to the public. It has focused on operating systems and tools for things like military applications, aerospace and jet airliner applications, and it's basically not a consumer software company. But its CEO believes that they are the best and that they are the only ones, through his methodology, who know how to make software that is perfectly secure, quite a dramatic claim, which they admit it's dramatic, and also bug-free. Well, anyway, because he believes that, he's decided that he's really upset with the way that Tesla has released Tesla FSD, a very buggy product, everyone will agree, onto the marketplace. And they think it's very dangerous and unsafe. Now, it's not clear that's true because actually, in spite of all the many mistakes Tesla FSD makes, and if you've seen my other videos, you know about those mistakes, in spite of those mistakes, it doesn't seem that anybody's been hurt. Now, my view on it is if no one's being hurt, we don't actually have a business telling people what to do just because we're afraid someone's going to get hurt. But other people definitely think that way. So Dan decided to make a big campaign, starting with Tesla as his first target about buggy, insecure software. He put a full-page ad in the New York Times telling people they do not want to be crash test dummies for Tesla and depicting it as horribly, horribly dangerous, which it isn't yet. Of course, it might become so. But nonetheless, this has engendered a lot of debate. Many people have accused him of doing this just so he can sell more software. I don't actually think that's true. But for all the details on this, and it's a pretty complex issue, I think you'll want to look at my article, which you'll find in the description, which goes into understanding his case and understanding where he might be right and where he might be wrong. But one area that he's definitely right is that lots of our critical infrastructure and our cars are not currently secured against computer intrusion, hacking. This is perhaps even more scary today than when he made his ad, because as we all know, one of the world's most powerful hacking societies, Russia, has decided that it's ready to go to war with the West. And it hasn't done a lot of cyber attacks so far, but it definitely has the capability. And if it wanted to, it could probably break into some of the connected cars that are out there and take control of them and cause really calamitous results. And it is important that those things, as well as our power plants and other critical infrastructure, be as secured as we can make them be, and also that they communicate as little as they need as they can. They should only communicate the bare minimum to get done what they need to get done. Unfortunately, there's a large movement in cars hoping that we will actually have cars talking to everything out there, which I think is a bad idea. Now, back to those federal regulators. NHTSA, which I told you about on the Tesla Rolling Stops, they published this document called the FMVSS, the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard. And this is a standard which every car that's manufactured or imported or sold, in the United States, has to meet, and it defines all kinds of things. Unfortunately, when it was written, you may not be too surprised to learn that it didn't expect self-driving cars that have no steering wheels, no drivers, no pedals, and so many of its rules refer to things like the driver's seat and the passenger seat, things that you'll do with the wheel, things that you'll do with the pedals. And so it's essentially impossible to get a car approved that doesn't have those things in it, like the Cruise Origin and like other vehicles that people plan. So the good news is that they announced that they would at least revise the section of the document that talks about internal occupant protection, and they'll no longer require you to think of it in terms of having a driver's seat or having, a passenger airbag and all these other things. Everyone's going to be a passenger in these vehicles. And so it will now be possible to meet those standards without looking like a traditional car. They haven't fixed the other parts of the standard that still refer to drivers. That means people working to get cars out will still have to ask for exceptions, as Cruise did for the Origin. They have rules that have allowed them to grant these exceptions. But in the end, hopefully we'll see a set of regulations that don't make it impossible to put out a self-driving car. The last item is a story that recently came out in Wired, where they did for the first time an in-depth interview with the woman who was the safety driver in the Uber self-driving car that tragically ran over and killed a woman in Tempe, Arizona a few years ago. Most of you will have heard of this, and I have written a great deal about it, which you can find on my sites. It was, of course, tragic. It caused the Uber project to shut down for effectively forever, because the end result was they sold off that project and merged into Aurora. And when I say sold, they actually paid Aurora about $600 million of investment in order to absorb that, and they got stock in Aurora. Now, not a bad deal as it turns out. Aurora went public via SPAC and is now worth more than Uber invested in it. So I can't say they got a great deal of punishment, but basically it was the end of their project, and it's been absorbed into another, and it had to shut down for a very long time. But Uber otherwise was, not exonerated, but the police decided they would not pursue criminal charges against Uber They did, however, pursue criminal charges against the safety driver. This is the woman who was supposed to be watching the road, supposed to be taking over the car if anything happened, like a pedestrian walking in front of the car. She did not, and the allegation has been that she was actually watching a show, The Voice, on Hulu on her phone, on her personal phone, instead of driving. And in the video, you can see that she definitely is not looking at the road for quite some time before the tragic collision occurs. For this reason, she's been charged with criminal gross negligence and can face some jail time for her involvement in this. The defense has revealed some of their strategy in this case. That's what's new. They're saying that she was not watching the TV show on her phone. She was just listening to it, something that Uber allowed in their policies. Instead, the reason she was looking down was that she was looking at her work phone and using Slack, which is a chat system used by many companies, and that in fact, when Uber used to put two safety drivers, or at least two staffers, in every vehicle being tested, one behind the wheel, the other monitoring the software, it was the job of the second driver, the second monitorer, to be using Slack and communicating with other Uber employees and updating on what was going on. That was part of their job. When Uber made the strange decision, which many of us have questioned, to switch to having only one safety driver in the car, something that made no sense because they weren't at the point where they were ready to do that by any stretch, and they certainly didn't need to save money. No self-driving team that's well-funded needs to cut the amount of safety in order to save some money at this point. Well, anyway, they decided to cut it down to one, and now the driver behind the wheel was supposed to be on Slack, but they were told that they could only be on Slack when they were pausing, which would make a lot of sense. You certainly wouldn't think you should be doing it while you're driving. But nonetheless, this opens a wrinkle in the case because, of course, in a criminal case, the standard is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. If she says, I was not watching the show, I was just listening to it, that certainly, you may or may not believe her, I'm not sure I do, but it opens a reasonable doubt into whether or not she was actually watching the show, and thus grossly negligent. You have to prove not just negligence, but a really high level of negligence to get a conviction in this sort of case. Well, what was she doing? We may not know. We can only watch the video of what was going on. There is an argument, though, that one could say that it's understandable why you might have had confusion about using Slack. If you used to using it during the ride and you're told to still use it and you're maybe not clear on the instructions, well, all of that could add up to a reasonable doubt about whether or not she thought she was supposed to be looking at her work phone. She definitely wasn't supposed to be looking at her personal phone while driving. Now, whatever happened, it is the reason that the victim died. Many people have focused a lot, and I have certainly written a lot, on the technical mistakes that the Uber vehicle made, and it did make several, and it was of very low quality. But it's very important to understand that this is how testing of self-driving cars works. They are prototypes. They do not work. They definitely will make mistakes and cause crashes if there is nobody supervising them. And so you just expect there are going to be failures. All those failures will have reasons. All of those failures will be the result of mistakes. But that's why there is a safety driver, or ideally two, monitoring the vehicle. Their job is to take over the wheel and stop those accidents from happening. I have done this myself. I did it at Waymo. I've had circumstances where I had to grab the wheel to prevent the car from going off the road. This has been the case for every team, even the best teams, in their early days. But the safety driver system, except for this Uber incident, has worked. There really have been fewer crashes per mile in the self-driving cars with safety drivers than ordinary drivers have, with the one exception of this Uber case. And so there definitely was some negligence here. There may have been criminal negligence on the part of the safety driver. There was also negligence, I think, on the part of Uber, but they settled with the families and they got out of criminal charges, so we will not see anything further done against them. All right, so there's a wrap-up of a whole bunch of recent stories, some of which you may have missed. A few I wrote about, a few I'm only covering here. Stay tuned and subscribe if you'd like to get more updates on what's going on in the world of self-driving cars, and in particular what it means. On this channel, I focus on deeper analysis of what it all means rather than just giving you the news. I look forward to seeing you in the future.